Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The United States and European Union have reached a trade deal framework ending a months-long standoff. The agreement includes a 15% US tariff on EU goods, half of the threatened 30%, with zero tariff access for certain US exports to Europe. The leaders of Cambodia and Thailand arrived in Malaysia today for ceasefire talks in their border conflict. US and Chinese ambassadors also attended the meeting in Putrajaya. At least 6 people have been killed in a shooting at a market in Bangkok, including the gunman who took his own life. Thai police confirmed the incident today. United Nations AIDS chief calls for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and not just a pause. This comes as restrictions ease and over 100 trucks of aid are collected. Trump says Israel will have to make a decision on the situation, while the WHO warns malnutrition has reached alarming levels in the enclave. China is pushing for mutual respect and reciprocity in trade talks with the United States, with negotiators meeting in Stockholm, Sweden. China hopes to strengthen cooperation and promote stable development of US-China relations. A Russian airstrike on Kiev wounded 8 people, including a 3-year-old child, after midnight today. 4 of the injured have been hospitalized, with 1 in serious condition, according to Kiev authorities. US President Donald Trump will host British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at his Scottish Gulf resort for talks including their recent trade deal and the Gaza hunger crisis. Trump said he expects Starmer will be pleased with the EU trade agreement announced earlier. Police in Ecuador reported that at least 14 civilians were killed in 2 attacks in a coastal area where drug trafficking gangs are fighting for control. The attackers fired at a group near the initial site, killing 2 more people. A major breakthrough in transatlantic trade. US President Donald Trump and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have announced a landmark deal, narrowly avoiding a trade war that deepened to shake global markets. The agreement imposes a 15% tariff on most EU goods, half of the 30 to 50% rate Trump had warned of, and sees the EU commit to $600 billion in US investments, including energy and military equipment. Trump hailed it as the biggest deal ever made, topping last week's $550 billion Japan pact. The euro dipped 0.3% and stocks rallied at the news, with Germany's DAX, France's CAC and Italy's MIB all rising 0.4 to 0.8%. Analysts called the move a relief for markets and a big win for the US. The framework also exempts key sectors like aircraft, some pharmaceuticals and chemicals. However, steel and aluminium remained at a 50% tariff, with further talks expected on spirits and agriculture. Critics in Europe say the deal favours the US and leaves many details vague. Trump's team insists tariff hikes could return if commitments aren't met. We're now joined by Mark Sutherland, who's a geopolitical commentator. He joins us live from London. Mark, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the programme. What are your thoughts about this deal? It's getting widespread criticism, some from member leaders of the 27 European bloc. People are saying that the US widely benefits from this deal over the European Union. What's your analysis?
Thomas, good to be with you. I think the first thing to say is the fact that there was a meeting between President Trump and Ursula von der Leyen. Every single time it seems that these important negotiations, the president is in the center of this, pushing it over the line in the way that he thinks is best for his country. I think that's the thing to bear in mind. It's about getting jobs back into America, establishing the manufacturing base on a greater level there. He is also concerned, if looking at reports, that previously, I think last year or in the last 2 years, you could say that there's been that America has spent $256 billion more in Europe than vice versa. Yes, you're right on the steel, because Trump is also looking to mass production and jobs in America, to actually say, well, can't we create our own steel? I think, as someone's already said, there is a lot of detail to go through. America has been concerned about tariffs on cars. Europe has been concerned about the tariffs that were threatened on exporting cars into America. I would actually say, without this sort of being a covering statement, that it is complex. But the big headline, why the rally in the stocks, is because the tariff of 15% is the figure that's being lauded instead of being 30%, if not higher, Thomas.
Yes, indeed, Mark. Obviously, when Donald Trump stood in that White House Rose Garden with his big board and announced this deal, there was widespread condemnation from economists and political leaders worldwide. However, now people are scrambling to make this deal with Donald Trump. Do you think Donald Trump, in fact, got it right when it came to his tariff policy?
On a personal level, I think yes, because he's turning around and saying, I am president of the United States. I have made promises. I want to see jobs back into America. Now, there's another long discussion from the past about NAFTA and GAFTA and how they have lost so many jobs, say, into Mexico, if not previously before that, manufacturing bases in regard to China. So he is looking on a longer term, and one of the reasons why it's a longer term is because he wants to see America economic might as number one. Plus the EU, they're all of our economies within the EU. Many of them are in the doldrums. We need to be able to produce goods, export, and of course the American market is our biggest.
Yes, Mark. And there has been many of the European Union member states respond to this trade deal, some in a negative way. Hungarian Premier Viktor Orban said that Donald Trump ate von der Leyen for breakfast. What's next in the process? Obviously, this has to go and be approved by all 27 member states here. What's next? Do you think this deal will get through?
Well, the key thing, Thomas, to remember, and it's one of the reasons why we voted for Brexit 2016, all those years ago, is the fact that you've got one person, one body, negotiating trade deals on behalf of all the members of the European Union. And Viktor Orban comment is understandable. Again, he's thinking of his own country, but also it's this whole thing where we have to release the control that the European leadership feel that they have on all the different members of the EU. I think in time, of course, this will be completely and utterly ratified because the European Union are just grateful to get a deal, this in my opinion, that is not above 15%. But the bigger question is then enabling the separate European countries to actually be able to sort out their trade differences so they can then trade and get jobs back into their countries, etc., etc. But the European model, in my opinion, doesn't allow that to freely happen where nations can stand up on their own. That is not the model that they want, Thomas, at all.
Yes, Mark, you are staying with us to discuss further developments. We next head to the Middle East, where the Yemen Houthi rebels have announced that it has decided to escalate its military operation and has begun implementing the fourth phase of the naval blockade against Israel. This is amid the ongoing tensions in Gaza. A statement issued by the group's armed forces, the Houthis declared that this phase includes targeting all ships belonging to any company that deals with Israeli ports. They further mentioned that this is regardless of the company's nationality or location that can be reached by the armed forces. The statement also warned that the ships may be targeted regardless of the destination if accessible to the Houthi missiles or drones. The Houthis have intensified missile and drone strikes on Israel since Israeli forces resumed attacks on the Gaza Strip in March after 2 months of a shaky ceasefire. Since November of 2023, the group has also targeted commercial shipping in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden and the Arabian Sea in what it says is support of Palestinians. We're once again joined by Mark Sutherland. Mark, what does the Houthis' fourth phase of the naval blockade actually entail, and how significant is this escalation for the region?
But if you look at their words, the words are a blockade. The words are to attack any international shipping that is trading with Israel. You can then come to a very quick conclusion that they then want to escalate this in greater detail across anyone that is actually trading with Israel. This is their threat. This is what they wish to do. If you then cause chaos within those trading routes, you are then able to add to the melee of discussion that's going on any pressure on Israel that other people feel that they need to put on in regard to what is happening in Gaza. We have all the discussion about the aid that is going in or the aid that is not going in. You and I need another 20 minutes on that one. But this is all about economic pressure, Thomas. Remember, the Houthis are part of the Ring of Fire in regard to Iran, and it's about applying that pressure. Who knows on their side what discussions Iran, etc., are actually having in this Ring of Fire? But what they are doing is do whatever they can as they're looking at what's happening in the press, in the propaganda war, to then step things up and step up the pressure. You start sinking international boats, then there will be more conversation with Israel to say, can you please stop the war against Hamas, which Hamas started on the 7th of October 2023. That is all part of this dialogue and pressure, and in my opinion, has to be looked in regard to a broader spectrum of what they want to achieve.
Yes, indeed, Mark. For our next update, we stay in West Asia, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has denied reports of Israeli attacks on Christian communities amid growing international criticism. Speaking to a gathering of evangelical Christians in Jerusalem, Netanyahu emphasized what he called strong protections for Christians in Israel and accused critics of spreading lies about the country's actions. His remarks come just days after an Israeli airstrike hit the Holy Family Church in Gaza, killing at least 3 people, an incident that has drawn condemnation from church leaders in Jerusalem. They describe the humanitarian situation in Gaza as dire, with widespread hunger and suffering. Netanyahu also pushed back against claims of starvation in Gaza, accusing the United Nations of distorting facts. But top religious figures, including the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, say people in Gaza are indeed starving and urgent aid is essential. Once again, we're joined by Mark Sutherland. Mark, it seems like Israel's words, at least Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's words, are not being believed around the world. Condemnation, international pressure about Israel's government. Why is this happening?
Well, because if when you're sitting down to negotiate with Hamas and they are turning around and saying that the number 2 part of the reason why we would then want to go along with the ceasefire is to stop any other aid agency providing food in regard to Gaza that is outside UN control. The Washington Street Journal have just reported this, which I think is a very, very interesting development on those lines. The bottom line is this is about control of actual giving supplies and food into the Gaza region. This is the reason being is because Hamas makes money out of that. Once you begin to take the control out of that, you then start to deplete the finances that they are then receiving. Other banks around the world are also shutting their accounts. It has been previously said that they are then running out of money to actually pay their fighters, etc. In regard to attacks on Christian communities, Thomas, in regard to the Catholic Church in Gaza, my own understanding there that an ordinance, part of an ordinance, went onto the top of the church. Unfortunately, if you then, Thomas, go back to the accusations of abuse against Christians, there was an incident in Taiwan, which is under Palestinian Authority control, which is the biggest Christian community that is there. When you then investigate that, where Jewish settlers are herding their cattle, they then are accused of violence. The Arabs in that area actually set fire to fields. They then come along and put those fields out, and they get accused of that. Sorry, Thomas.
Apologies for the interruption. Another claim that Benjamin Netanyahu made was that people aren't starving in Gaza. However, there are countless humanitarian organizations that say that that is not true. The UN has found over 1.17 million people were experiencing emergency to catastrophic hunger. This is an unprecedented level worldwide. We've also obviously seen the visuals of starving children. Benjamin Netanyahu completely denies that this starvation problem is real. What is your response to that?
The pictures you would then have to examine. You would then have to work out whether they've actually come from Turkey, whether anything has been doctored. Bluntly, I will say that to you. There is also tons and tons of supplies outside ready to go into Gaza that have been held up because of the UN then accusing Israel of saying, well, we can't get this in, we don't have protective routes. And the Israeli Defense Forces turn around and say there's at least 3 routes in there. The thing to say is this: in no time within war is the country that was then attacked actually feeding the country that attacked them in the unprecedented way that the Israeli government, the IDF, are in fact doing. This is a power play, Thomas, as much as this may be a completely and utterly unacceptable to say. If we look back when hostages release, and you look at certain individuals there, and you think that various people are extremely well fed. Do I want to see anyone starving or the violence, etc.? No, I don't. But we are dealing with a lot of propaganda, and this is basically asking Israeli forces to stop the war in piling on the pressure constantly in regard to the propaganda war. And of course, getting aid in is a weapon that is actually used. And what Hamas and other NGOs, organizations, have not liked is that Israel, working with an American charity, is working hard to get food directly to people free of charge, instead of Hamas then putting a percentage on there to make profit, to actually fund them to continue the actions that they have been taking against Israel.
Just to provide some balance there, Mark, the UN and all these other agencies that are experienced in handing out this aid have said that it is Israel that are blocking aid from getting into the Gaza Strip through their countless military checkpoints, etc. Unfortunately, we ran out of time on that topic, but Mark Sutherland, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now stay in the region where Israeli authorities have approved 3 major settlement expansion projects in Ma'ale Amim, a settlement built on occupied Palestinian land just east of Jerusalem. According to the Palestinian Colonization and Wall Resistance Commission, the new plans would add over 3,100 housing units, expanding deeper into the occupied West Bank. The goal, officials say, is to create a full geographical community between Ma'ale Amim and the industrial zone of Mishor Amim, solidifying Israeli presence between Jerusalem, Jericho, and the Jordan Valley. Palestinian officials warn this move will further isolate nearby Palestinian communities and is part of a broader effort to entrench Israeli control in the region. The Commission described the reapproval as a race against time to reshape facts on the ground, amid stalled peace talks and rising regional tensions. The projects have drawn sharp criticism, with many seeing them as another blow to prospects of a two-state solution. We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei, Taiwan. Ross, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. Ross, what can you tell us about the approval of these new Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank and the effects that it will have on the Palestinian people that live there?
It comes as no surprise that the coalition led by Netanyahu has made this decision. This is a very pro-settler governing coalition, and to keep member parties of the coalition happy, the government has to periodically make these kinds of decisions and expand settlements. So it comes as absolutely no surprise. As far as the effect on the Palestinians, I mean, we know from past settlement activity that often it does result in disruption to Palestinian communities, especially if the resulting roadworks and the construction of housing has the effect of isolating Palestinian communities. But the interesting thing here and thing to watch is Israel going to be responsive to international criticism? Because there inevitably will be a lot of international criticism. I would expect criticism to come from Europe and from the Middle East as well, but it's unlikely to come from the United States because the Trump administration is generally supportive of the Netanyahu government. So Israel, they're being criticized for the conduct of the war in Gaza and the humanitarian situation. They'll be criticized for this as well, but it's not going to stop them from proceeding.
Ross, just quickly, because I'm very conscious of time here, there's been increased calls for a two-state solution and Palestine being recognized as a state by the West. Obviously, we've seen France do that. Macron said he's going to do it at the UN in September. What message does this send about Israel's stance on the two-state solution?
It's very clear that the Israeli government, and frankly, I think it's fair to say the Israeli people as well, they don't see a two-state solution as viable at the moment or any time in the near term. So again, they're going to continue to proceed with their own policies in the West Bank, and they're not going to refrain from expanding settlements in the hope that it will accelerate two-state solution negotiations, because that's just not on the agenda of the Israeli government at the moment.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you. You are staying with us to discuss further updates. The United Nations has urged Iran to impose an immediate moratorium on the death penalty, citing a significant rise in executions. The UN Human Rights Office reported that at least 612 people have been executed in Iran in the first half of 2025. More than double the 297 executions reported during the same period in 2024. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk described the situation as deeply disturbing, emphasizing the urgent need for Iran to halt executions. The United Nations also expressed concern over the lack of transparency in judicial proceedings, with many trials reportedly held behind closed doors and failing to meet international fair trial standards. The surge in executions follows a wave of arrests and repression after the 12-day war between Israel and Palestinian groups, with some NGOs accusing the Iranian government of using executions to suppress dissent. We're once again joined by Ross Feingold to discuss this further. Ross, what are your thoughts on Iran's judicial system and its use of executions?
Iran is typically one of the most prolific execution states in the world. Often they're cited as being second only to China. So it's clear up to now that international criticism, and this is not the first time that the UN has made similar calls. It happened earlier this year when the 2024 data was revealed. Iran is clearly not responsive to international or UN criticism on this issue, and unfortunately they use it not just against criminals, but they use it against critics of the government as well. And that is a terrible situation for the Iranian people. But this is a repressive state. This is how the government treats its own people. They even execute critics. So unfortunately, the reality is this situation is probably not going to change in response to UN criticism.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. As always, pleasure to have you on. We now move east now, where China's foreign ministry has called on Japan to act more cautiously regarding Taiwan, urging the country not to take actions that could undermine China's sovereignty. The statement comes amid rising tensions in the region, with China increasingly critical of foreign involvement in the Taiwan issue. The ministry stressed that Japan should respect China's territorial integrity and refrain from any steps that might escalate the situation. This marks the latest in a series of diplomatic exchanges between China and Japan as both countries navigate sensitive issues surrounding Taiwan's status. China maintains that Taiwan is an inseparable part of its territory, while Japan has expressed concerns over the growing military presence in the Taiwan Strait. We're now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a foreign affairs expert joining us from Tokyo, Japan. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. How would you analyze the current relationship between Beijing and Tokyo, especially navigating issues in the Taiwan Strait?
China is preparing to making more pressure toward Taiwan, and that has a long-term strategy. So that's why if Japan support Taiwan, this is a headway for China, and China is thinking, China's perception, China and Japan is competing, influencing Taiwan. So that's why this time their remark is like that. But last year, the similar remark has happened. That time, China said, if Japan support Taiwan, Japanese people will be under fire. The Chinese envoy said last year. So that's why this is remark repeatedly happen from China. So China is very frustrated with Japan's influence in Taiwan because Japan is very popular in Taiwan. But at the same time, yesterday, the record vote for the pro-China politician in Taiwan was failed. So that's why now the pro-China politician gets more power to say some things. Under such kind of situation, China want to support it. At the same time, China want to say everything wrong is Japan related. So because of the Japan support Taiwan, that has happened, something like that, China want to emphasize as a logic. So that's why this timing, China tried to say Japan is wrong, Taiwanese is not wrong because all of Taiwan is Chinese. China want to say, something like that is background of this remark, I think.
Yes, Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Unfortunately, we have run out of time this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.